I've chosen for the topic today, orbiting the giant hairball. And I'm a bit inspired by this delightful little book by a fellow called Gordon Mackenzie. And I'm going to read a little bit of Gordon's story to you to do justice to the originator of this idea. He was a member of the staff of Hallmark Cards for many decades. And he writes, "When I first joined Hallmark, I neither knew nor cared about hairballs. I'd been hired by the editorial department to be one of two sketch artists working to serve a whole staff of writers and editors. I liked that." But he says that he was beginning to regret that he had ever been hired at the big grey place at Hallmark, as the corporation was referred to by some of the less reverent old-timers. It was a world of corporate decorum, incongruously anemic compared to the colourful, exciting products we were working on. And then he writes, "I started hearing stories, wonderful stories, about kinky artists, oddball writers and bizarre behaviour in a department that was sequestered from the mainstream, contemporary design, Hallmark's crazy aunt in the West Wing. I wanted to work there. However, it was a small group and a lot of other artists and writers wanted to work there too. It took me 2.5 years to finagle my way in. Contemporary was everything I had heard and hoped. More even, there was a kind of kindergarten chaos from which W. Robert McCloskey, the department director, orchestrated a sparkling flow of saleable product. I was in awe of Mr. McCloskey as he was addressed with unintentional reverence by his unwitting followers. He was addressed as Mr. McCloskey but referred to as Big Pink. There's actually a picture of Big Pink in here and it would probably help. Where is it? Never have a bright idea on the spur of the moment. I can show it to you morning tea time. There it is. There's Big Pink. Okay. But he presided over a Mad Hatter's tea party with a wily sense of mission and an enduring customer-oriented vision. I wouldn't have described it with these words back then, but this was my introduction to hairballs and orbiting. Here was Hallmark the hairball, barrelling along with all the success-fired momentum of its own cultural imperatives and compulsions, and orbiting around it, responsible to but not controlled by the hairball, was contemporary design. He goes on to talk about what it meant to be a renegade. Renegades are tricky people to deal with, he writes. By definition, they resist being led. Mr. McCloskey's response was to draw on his uncanny talent for leading without leading. He understood that renegades go off on tangents, and that was just fine with him. Flying off on a tangent is the first step in the process of going into orbit. That fitted right in with his plans. Hairball is a policy, a procedure, a conformity, a compliance, rigidity, and submission to status quo, while orbiting is originality, rules breaking, non-conformity, experimentation and innovation. To keep his department young and yeasty, McCloskey wanted his crew, at least those of us who were eager and willing to make the trip, to be in orbits of our own. In orbit, where invention happens. So he'd let us fly off on our tangents. But so that we would not go spinning into deep space, where we would be useless to him and to Hallmark, he would, with his own unique brand of gravitational pull, transform our tangents into orbits, allowing us to travel paths related to the system, but not of the system. Now, do you recognise those descriptions about life, corporate life? Conformity, systems, compliance, privacy, elders, code of conduct, child-safe environments, insurance. Are those the sort of things that make up our own particular hairball in the life of our church councils? And I don't know about you, but I get very weary. I know how important all that stuff is, but I long to go into orbit pretty often. How would it be if we went into orbit for some time of every meeting? So what I'd like you to do is to... there's the nice picture of hairy giant hairballs and what they might look like. And there, do you notice what's in the middle of it? It's a lock. So my question for you is introduce yourself to somebody near to you that you did not come with, introduce yourself and then have a quick conversation about what sort of things clog you up in your church council. What's your hairball look like? Okay. So let's call out some ideas about the sort of things that are part of our hairball. Some ideas from around the room. Just call something out. See, property. Okay, you're in for a torrid time, Lynn, wherever you are. Money. Yes, they're the two, aren't they? Property and finance.
Personnel.
Pardon? Personnel. Recruiting and staffing and all that stuff. Yeah. HR.
Someone here said paperwork.
Yes. Yep. Yes. WHS.
Nitpicking details.
Absolutely. Nitpicking details. Getting the minutes absolutely word perfect. Because you've got someone out in that congregation that when they read the minutes, they're going to do that. So you might as well save yourself the trouble and do it now with the whole group, right? Yeah. I think the next time I might talk about dealing with difficult people. Okay. Other ideas?
Honouring tradition.
Honouring tradition, yep. Yep. And it's a huge workload. It's been quite a revelation for me. I've chaired a couple of church councils in the last 2 years, and you long to get, you think, well, we haven't done this, we'll put that off till the next meeting, we'll put that off to the next meeting, and suddenly you find yourself crawling out from a whole pile of what I'd call autumn leaves, really, that are slowly becoming disgusting in the corner. Okay. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the challenges in getting out from the hairball. Of course, you know, I don't know what your images of a hairball are, but I grew up where there were lots of cats in the house, and most of them adopted. But the hairball is a particularly disgusting thing, isn't it, when a cat produces it. And of course it's because the cat's doing what it needs to do to keep itself clean. It's the result of constant grooming. So how do we deal with this stuff? Now, there are a couple of fellas by the name of Goffey and Jones who've written a lot in the area of leadership and corporate behaviour and so forth, and I'm going to use their model with some adjustments for church life. And they talk about the two demands of sociability and solidarity. Now, what they mean by solidarity is we are all together focused on the goal. This is our corporation. I'm not talking church language. They don't talk church language, okay? So we are all together. We are marching in the right direction. We are all focused on sales or whatever it might, service or whatever it might be. Okay? So that variable is solidarity. And I'd call it being task focused or hairball focused, okay? On the other axis, they talk about sociability, and that's about how human is our enterprise. So how, for a church, it might be, what are the spiritual issues that we need to deal with as a community? It might be, I don't know whether I'm moving too much or whatever. If it annoys you, I'll take it off and I'll just talk a bit louder. So sociability is about the human aspects of life together as an organisation. And this is what their graph looks like. Okay, so if we have a group of us in leadership or management who are really totally focused on the task, the outcome, get the job done, let's get it out of here, okay? Tick the jobs off. All we care about is the outcome. Then they call that, interestingly, mercenary. An organisation becomes by character mercenary. If, on the other hand, there is no or little focus on the outcomes and getting things done and achieving our goals, then their word for that, with low sociability and low solidarity, is fragmented. Okay, so this is high solidarity and low sociability. We end up mercenary, so totally focused that people don't matter anymore. And if we don't care about task and we don't care about relationships, we are fragmented. Now the ones up the top are really interesting, aren't they? That if we have a low drive towards task or outcome, but we love being together, they call that being networked. And of course, if there is high focus on task and high focus on relationships, spirituality, being human together, they would call that community. I wonder if you'd like to sit for a while and just think about how it feels. I'm not talking about what I'm just going to get you to tap into your feelings. How do you feel when you're about to go off to a church council meeting? Okay? What sort of feelings, and in what quadrant do those feelings belong for you? I'm not going to ask you to share them. My experience of conflict in church council, you always end up here. Conflict breaks down both sets of goals and hopes for a community. And for me, the only answer in dealing with conflict, that sort of conflict, is to actually work very hard in both directions so that we end up in the opposite corner of the diagram. Any thoughts or reactions from anybody?
One reaction is that maybe when you've been in a community and things have been happening quite well and the numbers drop, the tasks are too many for the fewer people, and then you become fragmented.
Yes.
And so you could perhaps go in a bit of a circle here.
Yes.
And it makes sense to me that maybe our church, for example, we are trying to do too much. And so I don't think we're quite fragmented, but we certainly have elements of that within us.
Yes. I think that a lot of our church councils are at different risk of being in the three other quadrants. And I think that as we shrink and our capacity to do things diminishes, one of the things that happens is that we have some bold leaders who actually, in order to get things done to keep the show on the road, in their own personal style, become very much like that, the mercenary focused position. And then what happens is that they have more and more fragmented relationships around them. And the difficulty for everybody else alongside of those people is they have to be grateful that the jobs get done, but relationships aren't good. And that's a recipe for great difficulty, I think, on a church council. The other thing that happens is you have lots of people who are very focused on the work, but they all do it in such silos that they actually end up more like a network than a community. Where when you come together, all we do is we just inform each other about what's going on, but we don't actually engage in real collaboration. So there are challenges for us. Let me head us into one of the ways to begin thinking about this, and it comes from a fellow by the name of Barry Johnson, who has provided me, and I hope you too, with a really helpful tool as to how we think about some of these things when we don't want either or. We don't want either the hairball or the orbit, do we? We want both, do we not? And there are lots of things in life where we want both and, not either or. And in the life of the church, we want pastoral care and we want outreach. We want to care for the gathered community, and we want to focus on the community outside the gathered worshipping community. We don't want one or the other. We need to think about both. And yet you'd believe in lots of conversations, because we pit ourselves against each other a bit, that in a community will say we don't do enough pastoral care, or another group will say we don't do enough outreach. Okay, so how do we keep those balances? And one of the important things to think about is that some of these things are indeed polarities. Okay, they're things that we hold in tension as a community decides on its priorities and its life together. So they're poles held in tension. Let me describe that. Now, you're very familiar with that picture. What are you looking at? A vase or two faces. Yep, that was the easy one. What are we looking at? Someone praying or reading? Is there another picture there? A face, yes, a man with a beard and a moustache. Can you see it? Okay. What have we got there? Yes, we've got a skull, and the other one is? Someone at a mirror, a young woman at a mirror. Can everyone see them both? You have to blink a bit. It's a familiar one, I'm sure. What have we got there? An old lady and a young lady. Has everyone seen those? And you see the young lady with the ribbons down her long hair? You're right? Okay. You would have seen this in one of my letters a couple of years ago when we had UC information. What have we got? A rabbit and a duck. Now, is it a rabbit or is it a duck? It's both.
You've got to listen and see if it quacks.
Yeah, that's right. Or wait for it to reproduce. So it is both. Held in the same picture, we have two realities. So when we talk about polarities, we're talking about extremes on a pole. So up this end, we might put all the, I'm going to call it the hairball. Does everyone know what I mean now when I say that? We're going to put the hairball up there, and we're going to put creativity, new ideas, innovation, wild thoughts about whose we are and where we might be going. Okay, now if I'm going to ask this side of the room to concentrate on the hairball, okay? And what I want you to do is to help us, and you'll do it in little groups, think about what are the positives of a council being really focused on the hairball, okay? And what belongs in this quadrant down here, what are the negatives about concentrating on the hairball? Okay? And on this side, I want you in your little groups to talk about what are the positives of concentrating on creativity and innovation, and then to spend some time about what are the risks of concentrating on creativity and innovation. Okay? All right, so if you'd like to go back to your little groups, and if someone would like to write a few of your ideas down, you've only got 3 minutes. Okay? So what are the positives? Actually, I'll give you 5, okay? I'll be really generous. So what are the positives and what are the negatives? Okay? Now, let's hear from the hairball groups. What are the good things about being a hairball sort of church council? Anybody? Everything done? Sorry? Diane? There are rules and everyone knows what they are. Right. What are some other good things?
We were talking about how it provides a foundation for other things to happen in the church, and that it's
Yes.
to do exciting things around.
Absolutely.
So people can be confident it's a safe place if you have all the insurance, the child safe church stuff.
Absolutely. I love the words you've chosen. Often it means that there are clear reference points. If you've got all the things in place, then a whole lot of other things become simple, don't they? You don't have to rethink every issue that comes along. Yep.
We get risk protection.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have the achievements of measurable.
Yes.
That brings us stability.
Reliability.
Too busy?
Yes, well, we might start down here with that. Yeah. I'd like to add in there something about knowledge, that a council that is like that actually builds a fantastic foundation of knowledge about the church, about the way things are. You know, if you do the work, you know the stuff, is what I'm trying to say. Is that okay if I put that on? Like if you've spent hours with Malcolm Wilson, you'll know the privacy legislation front and back, right? Okay, well, what about some of the downside?
Overkill.
And what does that feel like? Overkill.
You just done it to death and keep doing it and doesn't achieve anything.
It's draining.
Boring.
We've always done it that way.
Entrenched. Can I put that word? Would that do?
You run out of time to do other things.
Yeah.
You lose sight of the big picture.
Yes. Absolutely.
But why?
Pardon?
But why?
You lose the why.
Yeah, why?
I like that, Brian.
we had restrictive, which is kind of all of those things really that you just put down.
Yeah, but it does say something else, doesn't it? It's limiting, confining. Okay. All right, what about the other side of the room? What are the good things about the orbit?
We get lots of ideas.
Yes. Can you read that? Would it be better if I used black?
Green's more creative.
Well, actually, De Bono would agree with you, yes.
Everything's bright and colourful, and there's a great buzz.
Excitement.
Yep. Permission giving. We actually find some fantastic new ideas, don't we? We go in, we choose things that might actually be spirit inspired. Yeah. Something comes out of the blue if you've got a group of people who are listening for something that comes out of the blue. Okay, so...
Identifying new leaders.
Would you like to talk about that a bit?
Or when people have a passion, it enables them to develop, it enables them, or people see them and enables them to develop themselves and as part of the community.
Absolutely right. Yep. New leaders, new ideas, new passion, new energy. Yep.
There's a more emotion, perhaps, filled things.
If I just say room for emotion, okay? Is that all right? All right. What's the downside, folks?
Make it follow through.
Aha. There's the voice of experience. That was a bit too fast.
They're not grounded.
Yes. Yep.
Fragmented.
The
Yeah.
more traditional, leave left behind or drop out.
Yes. I'm going to put more traditions as well as traditional. I'm not quite sure who said that. I don't know everyone's voices. Good, thanks. More traditions and traditional people. I hope you can understand my shorthand.
Financially irresponsible.
Yes. And I'll put another word that includes that, lack of accountability. Lack of culture of accountability. How's that?
Risk averse.
Well, they're risky. Yeah. Yep.
There is a danger of not providing appropriately for the community, like not creating the safe place.
Yes. Okay, we've run out of board, but I think you get the picture. Now,
Just one more thing.
yes,
People are left out of creative ideas.
that's,
They are not physically capable of doing it.
yes.
We also thought there's a lack of balance.
Balance goes, that says. All right. Now, what Johnson would say is that if you are on one extreme of this spectrum or the other, things happen. And it looks like this. Let me try. If I was clever, I'd be able to type all that up onto it and be a lot easier. But just bear with me. So if you're up in the top red quadrant, and you spend all your life in the Hairball as a church council, you reap all those benefits for a time. And the thing about polarities is that if you ignore the other end of the polarity for long enough, what happens is your position on that spectrum starts to drop. You start to go from top quadrant to bottom quadrant. So what looks like and feels like and has worked really well to achieve these sorts of things for you, if you stay in that quadrant too long, you drift into the negatives of that polarity. Okay? So, we go, if you can put that onto here, what happens is that, say you're about here in your church council, in terms of along the spectrum and how far, how much you concentrate, how strongly you emphasise those things. If you're here, you will start to drift down on the diagram. Okay, so you start here and you will start to drift down here. And so you'll begin to experience all this stuff, feeling bogged down, bored, fed up. We've been here before. When does this compliance stuff ever stop? We're losing the big picture. We're entrenched. We're not doing any new things. So what do we start to think then when we get in that place? We do. Let's fix it. How are we going to fix it?
White air.
Pardon? You white ant it?
No, new ideas.
New ideas. That's exactly. Sorry, I'm a bit deaf, Bruce. So you head up. Whoop. Okay. So you drift down to here and you say, oh, we don't like this. We're going to try the opposite. Okay. So you head up into this. And so you're likely to say, oh, this is great. We're all innovation. We tossed out all the old stuff because that wasn't doing good things for us and our church. We're going to be really innovative and permission giving and vital and excited and throw out. Who cares what Malcolm Wilson wants from privacy? We won't bother. We can put off doing child safe environment for another 2 years, can't we? Let's be a bright council that everyone wants to be part of. This is the place for new ideas, okay? So we live up there for a while. And then reality sets in. And we've stayed like this as a church council for so long that, oh, guess what's starting to happen? Lack of follow through. We neglect safe place. We begin to make risky decisions. Our finances go up the creek because we're too bold, okay? And so guess what happens when you get to this quadrant? Oh, don't like this. This isn't very good. Oh, we're not a very responsible church council. Whoop! Up you go. Back up to, you go heap back to there. So can you see what happens to us if we operate at each end of the spectrum all the time? We are on this never-ending figure of 8 that goes this way. Oh, we'll let it drift. Whoop. We'll try that. Oh, it drifts. Oh, that's not so good. Whoop. And firstly, it's not very satisfactory, and secondly, we're actually living half of our lives in the negative end. So what Johnson says is that a good leadership team, better watch the time, that a good leadership team will be very alert to where we are managing our polarities. And when we start to experience some of these negatives, we will more quickly respond with a balancing approach. And as soon as once we've done that, we begin to feel the negatives of the orbiting, we might think we might need to come in a bit closer to the hairball, so that a really good, oh no, that's it, so that hopefully that actually what we're doing is living in these two quadrants where we barely touch into the negative side before we are on our journey of balancing where we need to be. Who does that in your church council? Who's the person? Can you identify the person? Yeah, often, hopefully. I'd like that to be the case. No, not always, you minister. We're as plagued as all the rest of us with our preferences for orbiting or hairballs. But those people are really precious to you as a council. And I remember Ian and I were part of this is really quite embarrassing really, so perhaps I shouldn't have started, but Ian and I were part of the early charismatic movement in South Australia back in the early 70s. And we began to have some doubts about some of the practices that were going on, exorcisms that we weren't very happy about, things like that sort of got us a bit, this doesn't seem very Jesus-like sort of feeling to us. And what happened to us is that we became the spirit of doubt in the group. And that happens to people who pull against, who are ahead, now I'm sounding like I'm patting ourselves on the back, but who are ahead of where the group is, who are one step ahead in terms of sensing what needs to happen next to restore the balance and keep things straight. So it's really important that as other colleagues on a church council, that you actually do the listening. They might be miles ahead, but they might actually be helping you as a council with this sort of polarity management. And it may not be about hairballs and orbiting and creativity. It might be about all those other issues in church life where we have to make decisions about, do we spend our money on mission? Do we spend our money on the building? Do we spend our money on ministry, or do we spend our money on programs? All those sorts of things that really, when we have our wisdom hats on, we know that it's about both and about balancing them. Okay. So, how do we go about this? What are some of the things that help us? It's not just individuals. What are some of the things that help us? Now, Mackenzie tells about this Mr. McCluskey. His tool was to tell stories, to encourage people to tell stories. That was how, embedded in story is new possibility, is new experience, is a pathway for exploration. Now, I've been on church councils where we have so many storytellers that you pull your hair out, right? I know about that. But there is a place for storytelling, especially when you refer back to, what is it? Giving priority in its life to building up the congregation in faith and love, sustaining members in hope, and leading the congregation to a fuller participation in Christ's mission in the world. So stories are a worm into exploring some of the wider issues, that creative edge that will help us evaluate why privacy is so important. That will help with our focus on why do we need to think about the issues of marriage and how do we influence the bigger picture about those sorts of things. So stories. Now, the next one is about who makes up your church council. How many of you are familiar with De Bono's 6 thinking hats? Most of you? Great. I think Sandy might have led a session. Is that right, Christine, on De Bono's 6 thinking hats at one stage? It's a really easy to read book. And Edward de Bono talks about the different approaches we have to thinking and decision making. So he has 6 thinking hats, I have 8. I'm always complicated. So the white hat is about the facts. Give me the facts. If I'm going to make a good decision, I want everything in black and white, and I want to know what the bottom line is, and when we have all our facts gathered together, we are going to make a good decision as a church council, right? Yes. The blue hat is the process person. The blue hat is the person who knows what sort of steps we need to go through to be collaborative, to consult, to consider all the factors and so forth. So that's a process person. You've got some of those. I hope some of you are. The black hat. The black hat is often your treasurer. Sorry, treasurers. but your black hat is often the person who says, "No way, Jose." And I remember a very famous principal of a theological college not so long ago and not so far away, who the students worked out after a while, you go the first time and you're always going to get no, all right? So you never get discouraged by no, because you have to go back twice and 3 times and then you get a yes. So that was a black hat person, okay? Believes in, hang on, we're not getting carried away here. More likely to say no than yes, right? So that person is asking, what's wrong with this? Will this work? Now we have the red hat. The red hat person is someone who's in touch with their feelings and interprets decision making and issues through the lens of their humanity. Okay. So it's not about a wildly emotional person, although they might be like that. It's about somebody who interprets things by hunch, by intuition, by attention to very human need. The green hat, see, we did need green, is for creativity. What new ideas are possible? What is my suggestion? Can we create something new? So that's the possibility person. That's the person who will say, why not? Okay, what about, let's dream for a bit. That's going to be your green hat person. Your yellow person, there should be more of them in the world. That's your optimist. That's your person who says, well, what's positive about this? Let's build on the good things. Now, I have an orange hat and a purple hat. I think De Bono wouldn't like me very much for doing that. But for me, the orange hat is the harmony hat. And this is the person who was always in mediation mode in your church council, who's always trying to balance up what different people are thinking. They can be quite different from the process person, but this is the person who has ways to keep everybody satisfied in some way. Have you got some of those? And the purple hat is the spirituality hat. That's the person who is always thinking, where is God in this? Now, you'd think we'd all wear the purple hat, wouldn't you? So what are we being called to be? Why don't we pray about this? And I hope you have church council flooded with those as well. So...
Sharon, can I point out that these are hats, they're not uniforms.
That's exactly right.
I'm sure many of us are looking at that and saying, some days I wear a black hat and some days I wear a green hat.
And that's what De Bono would say is how you be a full, wise human being, is being able to take off the hats and to use all of them, actually, as individuals. But in a group, there are times when there's so much black hat talk that you might actually think, I'm going to take off my black hat or blue hat or whatever in order to bring balance into this conversation and into this decision that we might be making. So we all need to be familiar with all of these. I meant to say to you, I do have notes. You'll get them at the end, okay? So they're just the PowerPoint presentation. And I really like this picture from Paul Foreman, because it's a way for us, if you go away troubled about something that's happened in your council, pick out the picture and look at what's been happening here, where have we been focusing our attention. And if you find that the differences around the hats are producing big red stuff, then you have to have a completely different approach to the issue. It's actually not becoming about the issue, but about the conflict and the emotions and the relationships. Okay. So, the question becomes, what's missing on your church council? What sort of people do you need whose first instinct is one of the 6 or 8 hats, rather than for us to have to think too hard, so that you have around the table a balance of approach that's going to help you manage this hairball and this creativity, polarity. How are you going to do that? We're going. I'm nearly at the end of my time, so I'm wondering if you would like to talk to each other for just 1 minute about ways that you've dealt with it, ways that you in your church council have encouraged rounded discussion, how you've included the hairball stuff and the orbiting stuff, or maybe how have you, as the centre of the hairball, kept the innovators in orbit and not off in space. So can you talk to each other about that, and let's share some wisdom. Okay, let's have some ideas, folks. Okay, how have you managed it? I'm sure we've got some really beautifully functioning church councils here. How do you manage it?
Probably not that well, but I'm the chair of our council at the moment. We don't have a minister, so yeah.
You're it, Diane.
Yeah, exactly. And so I very much look at our agenda, and our agenda tends to be very property finance field. And so always try and find some other thing to put in there. Just an example, at our last meeting, we'd sponsored our playgroup coordinator to go to a conference. So we invited her along and talked to her about the conference and what she got out of it, and ways that we could help her and things that might be, able to help with. But really by looking at our agenda and saying, well, hang on, there's nothing, this is all business and that's not what we're about. So trying to balance up the agenda.
Thanks, Diane. Yes, getting people reporting in about ministry is really important, and it can be, not the usual suspects. So that's about stories that Gordon McKenzie would recommend too. So that's a really helpful thing to actually help church councillors see the end product, and to have a relationship with staff or leadership, not necessarily staff, not necessarily paid staff, but the relationships, keeping them strong and close, and not just personal, making them about links, formal links between those people and the council is really important. Okay, other ideas? While Don's getting it, let me just say devotions are really important. Please don't slip into any old thing will do for devotions, because and you need to find people to lead devotions who are really in touch with what is alive, what are live issues for you that actually promote thinking about stuff. Don?
Church councils tend to be coalitions of the willing, or those didn't step back when they were asked to be nominated. And so often it's not so much what people bring, but how flexible they are in swapping hats. You really have to try and encourage people who might be the village grump to occasionally see the bright side, and that happens. And if church councils can do that, except we are all flexible, creative people, then I think things start to work much better.
I think that's a really wise word. The other thing that you've sparked off for me is that we need to learn to play a little as a church council. And I don't know how you want to do that. If you meet, people are reluctant to come out at night, especially at this time of the year and all that sort of stuff. But there is a place for time away together, on retreat, to really get to know each other, to actually have some fun together, and to actually do some non-focused reflection on our life together. I think that that's really, really important, so that when it does come to collaborating and dealing with conflict and stuff like that, we are not strangers to each other. We're not just a mask of a position or a stance or a stake in the sort of issues that we might be dealing with.
Really work on consensus decision making.
Yeah. How many of you use the orange and blue cards? I am encouraged. It actually takes a lot of work to make the transition, but boy, it's worth it. And that's my opinion. And it takes courage from a chairperson, let me tell you. The first meeting I ever chaired with blue and orange cards was the joint council down at Newland Yilkey over Steve Thompson's appointment. The first meeting I ever chaired with the cards. That's enough to, keep you in the loo. But never mind.
It works okay for me because I can't see them. One of the important parts of the council meetings at Moriata is actually intentionalising pastoral care. And so we have a time of devotion, worship that is shared around by the members of the council who want to do it. But as part of that, we also spend time dealing with pastoral care issues, so that council is aware of the needs, both the positive and the challenges of the community.
We're going to break for a cuppa in a minute, but one more.
I was just looking at the hats before, and while you're talking too, so I probably missed a bit. But sometimes the hats help us work out where we're at as a council. We've got enough. I'm thinking about our issues at Blackwood. We've probably got enough information. We don't need too much more. We know how we feel about a lot of things, but we don't need any more ideas at the moment. But we certainly need to think more about our thinking, and we need to look at the benefits of some of the things we're doing and make some judgments. So we're really probably trying to interact with those three hats, and it's helpful to actually see where you are.
Yes.
And the hats help you do that.
One of the things that I've done in seminars or in workshops with individual church councils is that I will observe a council dealing with a made-up issue usually, and I will just let them run, and I'll be playing. I'll have a pack of cards of the different colours, and I'll play onto it's outside of their eyesight, onto a desk what hats I think are being used, and then we look at the end of that case study about exactly what are the sort of patterns that have come out in that. So somebody who's got the hats well and truly in their head, invite them along and see what it looks like. Look, we're going to have a couple. Let me just say that some church councils have decided that they'll have a dreaming or a visioning committee that sits outside the church council and then comes and tells the church council what to do. Well, sorry, I've given away what I think about it, haven't I? Because, I understand why we do that. Because it's much easier to dream in a small group than it is in a large group. And it's much easier to dream when you've got all green hats and none of the others. But it's not necessarily helpful for a church council to not be engaged with the struggle, the actual work of doing that work. And of course the other thing that we often siphon off is pastoral care, of course, and Bruce has mentioned that. So sometimes the concerns and the life, the burdens, the issues, the human issues of our communities never get raised in church council because it's somebody else's job to do that. And so I would encourage you to try to integrate some of those things, not necessarily give over your whole agenda to it, it's all about balance. But be wary. Be wary that you don't get all the hairball stuff and leave some of the joy to everybody else. So God bless you. Thank you so much, not just for being here, but for all the work you do.